Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Adoptive parents often discover that opening their hearts to adoption was the easy part. It's the emotional journey after the surrender to the idea of adoption that leads to the hard seasons of testing. Weaving scripture into our own journey, our next guest offers encouragement for those who are called to adopt. Regardless of where you are in the process, just beginning or now living with teenagers you adopted as infants, there are struggles unique to adoptive parenting. Weaving elements of our own journey through adoption, you'll find hope as you begin to see God's adoptive heart toward you. As an adoptive father myself, I found this new devotion will be rich with wisdom, clarity, and transparency. Jennifer Phillips, author of the widely praised book Bringing Lucy Home, is an adoptive parent to a loving little girl she and her husband affectionately named Lucy. A psychology graduate of Samford University, she served as executive director for the local Save a Life, a national network of crisis pregnancy centers. She and her husband lived in Brisbane, Australia, where her husband Brian served with University Impact, a franchise of campus outreach. She has 4 children, including one precious Chinese daughter, Lucy, and now lives here in Alabama. For more information, visit her blog at jenniferphillipsblog.com. Joining us now to talk about her new book, Hope When It Is Hard, is Jennifer Phillips. Jennifer, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Rabbi. This is a treat to be here.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to have you in our city, Birmingham, back where you went to college. And I'm surprised, I don't know when you were part of Save a Life, but I was the keynote at the banquets many times, and Bob Faust and Betty Thompson and many of the people, Cindy Hardis and all the Save a Life group are personal friends of mine, and an organization that I support wholeheartedly. So Carson's the Pregnancy Center does so much good all over the country, but very active here in Birmingham with Shelby County and with North Jefferson being the 2 main ones that I interact with. So it's exciting to know that you were a part of such a great work. For our audience that doesn't know you, that didn't read Bringing Lucy Home, take us kind of back to the early stages of your walk with the Lord, being called into crisis pregnancy, and what led you on a journey to answer the call to adopt.
Sure. It's a story I really love to tell. So I Christian at an early age. My dad is a Baptist minister, and so just so thankful to just to be raised with the Word and to have people pour into me, disciple me, and really just always, kind of had a heart for those on the fringes, to underserved populations, and just really compassion for those who, who may struggle in different ways. And so I ended up, majoring in psychology at Samford University, and with the thought of really wanting to help, whether that be social work, counseling, whatever. And then that led me after graduation to working at Save a Life. And one of my favorite parts of working at Save a Life, I did a lot of different things, but I loved it when I got to be in the counseling room talking to these women. And that was really the heart of the ministry, whether that's, just helping a woman who's struggling, with an unplanned pregnancy or just in a bad situation. But through that, I kind of got introduced to the birth mother side of adoption, and to see, that really it's an incredibly loving and sacrificial choice on the woman, a really painful choice. And just how brave it is when she is able to make that choice. And so that kind of sparked my passion for adoption. And my husband and I, we had said, this is something that we want to do someday, is really feel called to adopt. well, then we, had one biological child and then another and a third. And then we made the decision to move to Brisbane, Australia. And at that point, I thought, well, this isn't going to happen because in Australia, the adoption laws are really strict. It's really uncommon for a birth mother's rights to be terminated, and therefore there aren't very many kids that you can, to adopt. And just some different cultural things. It's just not, it's just viewed differently. So we thought, well, this isn't going to happen. And but when we were over there, I just could not let it go. I kept having this thought, I really think this is something we're supposed to do. And every so often I would Google, can Americans living in Australia adopt? Just to see if I would get some different kind of answer. And actually found out that there was a way for us to do it. And so we connected with Lifeline Children's Services here in Birmingham, and they started the process of helping us pursue international adoption to adopt a little girl from China. So we were matched with, I guess at that time she was 11 months old, and traveled to China Christmas 2013 to meet her. And so our whole family went, and my other kids at the time, they were 6, 8, and 10. So we all traveled to Australia to, there's a 2-week period of adoption process. And then our plan was at the end of that 2-week period that she and I would fly to America to get her automatic U.S. citizenship passport. My husband and the other kids would fly back to Australia. Then after about a week, she and I would go home to Australia, join with them, start our lives as a new family, really. And things didn't quite go according to plan. So she ended up getting her her passport application and citizenship denied. And she and I were stuck in America for, we didn't know how long it was going to be at the time. It seemed like nobody knew what to do. Nobody had been in this position before. And every day it was waking up, here I had this new daughter, that's challenging in and of itself. And then this thought of how in the world are we going to get home? And it took me on a deeper faith journey really than I'd ever been on, I think, of trust. And so it ended up that our family was separated for 2.5 months, and finally able to get things through immigration and get back to Australia and really start bonding with her and as a family. And so that was kind of our journey, to adoption in that really uncertain, scary time at the beginning of her time with us.
So here you are in Australia, and it sounds really quite complicated that you're working with a U.S. agency here in Birmingham, and you're under Australian regulations as an American citizen, and under the guidance of U.S. immigration, naturalization, and adoption services, and then China through their program there. That sounds like a diplomatic nightmare.
Yeah, what could go wrong, right? Yeah, it definitely was a complicated situation, but it was one that really lots of families before us had done the same thing, and there was a procedure to follow that we followed too. So what happened with us was really jarring and surprising to all involved, and it actually ended up changing the process of international adoption for American families living outside the U.S. So it was something that we, even though we knew, okay, this is complicated, we never saw this coming. Never thought that we would be separated and not know how to, to reunite. So it was one of those times where it's like, okay, Lord, I know you called me to this. I know This is what you told us to do. Why? Why this extra layer of hardship that we're walking through when this is challenging enough as it is?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say you felt called, break that down for our audience as to what that experience was like for you. Here you said that growing up you had the heart for the disenfranchised, for the fringe, for those that were, as the Bible talks about them, the least of these. And really that's who Jesus was called to. I mean, the disciples, the audiences that he spoke to were not the wealthy. They were not the stalwart citizens. As a matter of fact, you remember that he was on the Sea of Galilee, and they were there in Tiberias, and he wanted to go to the other side, and the other side is a city called Remote, R-A-M-O-T, and Remote was where the thieves and the prostitutes and the criminal element were, and that's where he wanted to go minister. So when we think about the other side, this is what you were called to. This is, it sounds like your heart was for those who were on the other side. We see it again when he tells Peter to fish on the other side. Again, it's not where you would expect, but it was to those that were marginalized or disenfranchised. So the calling that you had for this particular segment of humanity, how did that translate into adoption for you?
And it's actually a subject that I kind of addressed in the book, of this issue of calling. How do we know? How do we know that God's calling us to something? And it would be so nice if he would, send us a letter or write in the sky or something and say it that clearly. This is exactly what I want you to do.
Right.
But, like we know it doesn't really happen that way. And so I remember actually, we had kind of started the process and, taking these steps, and then we got the call that we've been, received a referral for our little girl. And, so we're like, okay. And I remember just this, it was like a weight sitting on my chest of, oh my goodness, like this is such an incredible decision. How do we know this is what we're being called to do? And so I remember my husband and I, we went to a park, we sat on a park bench, and we just kind of walked through it. And we're like, okay, we see in God's word that he calls us to care for the fatherless, care for those on the margins. So we know this is his heart. We see how he's wired us uniquely, and even with our experiences, my experience working in crisis pregnancy, I also spent a summer in China and really gained a heart for Chinese people and knew about, at that time, what was the one-child policy, which resulted in so many baby girls especially being abandoned. And so I knew that reality and how these experiences had kind of been woven in. We looked at, we had searched for counsel from other people that we really respected, that we knew walked with God, and they were affirming of this decision. It's like, okay, well, we look at all those things together. It seems like this is what God's calling us to do. And so with as much certainty as we can have, we're going to take the next step, and then if this isn't what he has for us, we're just going to trust that he's going to stop it. But our hearts are open, we're willing, we're submitted to whatever he wants. And in our understanding, we think this is what he wants us to do. And so it really, it was with fear and trembling in a lot of ways, but kind of looking at the whole picture, I would say all those things together would culminate in calling,
Let me back up for a second, because this is not just you. This is you and your husband. Now, let's pull him aside and kind of walk through who he is, and because one of the things, having gone through the experience myself, I was 37 years old, much older than what agencies are looking for. I had already established a career. My spouse was a career person. There were never any plans for children. I wasn't a believer. I was a part of the synagogue in Los Angeles at the time. I was really a member in name only. I never went. But when I got on board, it was same page, different book. It didn't come from a faith perspective. It came from a opportunity. It was really what it was. So, as a believer, I have no perspective of the adoption process coming from a faith in Jesus kind of model and looking at a biblical model. This was two corporate executives. This was like, okay, how is one of us going to give up our job? Well, no, we're well off. We live in a wealthy part of Los Angeles, and we can get live-in help. And so, it was very financially driven. It didn't become emotionally involved until the process actually began, and then there became a joint enthusiasm and excitement. So my experience was very different, very unique, very secular, convenient and financially driven, and very, very expensive. And we're talking about in excess of $40,000 in this process to go through with the court system and adoption agency and attorney. Very expensive. Expensive for you as well, with the travel and with the paperwork and with the agencies involved. But here your husband is in ministry. You have naturally born children to you. The early conversations, who initiated them? Was this a revelation to you both at the same time? Did you wake up one morning and say, the Lord spoke to me last night and I really think we should consider adopting? Or how this process developed? Because there's many mothers out there, many wives out there that deal with infertility, or have had multiple miscarriages and have been told that it's medically not to your benefit. You're a high risk pregnancy, and this is we really should take the necessary steps to physically protect you. But she has the desire to want to nurture, to want to love, to want to have a child, but it's just not physically possible. And so she has this secret desire in her heart to adopt. But her husband's gone through the in vitro, through the shots, through the agony of one broken-hearted expectation after another, and his mind isn't set on adoption. She's got this secret yearning in her heart. She wants to have a child, and she doesn't even know how to approach the subject. How do you even bring it up to talk to her husband to say, what about adopting? He might be the one who is not, he may be the problem. And so he's dealing with shame, he's dealing with guilt, he's dealing with self-recrimination because he can't his seed is not viable enough. So there's this struggle. Believers or not believers, this is immune. This is immune to the faith factor at this point. But here you are. You're both devoted to ministry. What is he saying? What is he going through? Is this a mutual, simultaneous in psychiatry? They would actually call it a folie à deux. A fantasy shared by two, where one thinks they're Napoleon, the other one thinks they're Josephine. They act this out. I mean, it would be supernatural that the two of you would wake up one day with the same spirit-led revelation. So, what was his side of this?
That's a good question. You know, I think in the beginning, like in our early years of marriage, we talked about adoption as kind of this like one day. Wouldn't that be great? But not there was no, it didn't feel real. There was no plan. Like I said, we, started having children biologically. And, being in ministry, and especially he was on the college campus, late hours, really heavy schedule. And so it just didn't seem like, so it was one of those like, wouldn't that be great? One day for us, to do this. It didn't seem reasonable at all at the time for that to happen. But it was the closer we got to moving overseas, when I knew about kind of Australia's position on adoption historically and just realistically with its laws, and I was saying this might not happen. It created this, like, I realized how strong that desire was. And I think that's when the conversation happened more. And even when we moved over there, it kept coming back. And so we would still kind of have these hypothetical conversations. And it wasn't until, when I found out definitively that there was a way that we could do it, that then it got serious. And it was like, okay.
So were you doing
a question there?
Right, were you doing like clandestine research? Were you digging in while he was on campus? You're digging into all of this, or was this a very open dialogue with him during the process of seeking out information?
It was really open, and I think the more serious we got about it, like, okay, we really need to make a decision about this, if we're going to go for this or not. We were really open about sharing both of our fears. I don't think either one of us had rose-colored glasses on about it. And so there was an openness to say, hey, this really scares me about this, or I'm not sure about this, or I have doubts about this. And it was really helpful for us to keep that conversation going, especially as we got further and further down the road. And I remember him saying to me one time, he said, I just want you to know, it's kind of like we had made the decision, we were in it,
Right.
And he said, I want you to know that I'm in this 100%. This isn't your idea, this is both of us. And that meant a lot to me, because I knew, there would be hard days ahead. And if we weren't both on board, there could be resentment on his side, and kind of like, well, you wanted to do this, and look how hard this is. It was, so I'm so thankful that he said that, so I could know, okay, yeah, good, bad, or ugly, we're in this together. And I know that this isn't just a bus that I'm driving. This is both of us together saying, we really feel like this is what God wants us to do, and we're both on board. So I would say, as far as advice to a woman who's afraid to bring it up, I think prayer is the key. Praying and trusting that if this is what God wants for your family, that He's going to move in both of your hearts, and to trust God's timing in that too, and that maybe the answer will be no, and you have to trust Him in that, as God is in that as well. But also just to be honest about any fears and doubts that are there. So those things don't come as a surprise later on. And that conversation stays open. And it's not like, well, I've got to act like this is all great all the time, when it's not.
In the book and in the previous book, you talk about adoption having some very unique, and we said in the opening, it doesn't matter what stage you're in, there's going to be issues with an adopted child. I happened to get a double because my daughter was C-section, and I had no idea that there are actual, not only being adopted, but a C-section child has different unique needs than a child that has actually passed through the birth canal. She never had those endorphins released. She never had that chemistry. And so that bonding that takes place when a child passes through the birth canal is very important in their psychological development. So that was an unknown for us that didn't surface till years later. We had been through the classes to talk about the anticipated, did somebody not love me enough, or do you tell your child they're adopted? All those things that you have to navigate, and you have to make decisions about how you're going to handle it. And we had decided that we would be very open, that from the very beginning that she was adopted. Wasn't going to be a surprise to her. But then there was the complications of this C-section that added to the other aspects, which were attitudinal. They weren't really developmental. They were relational and attitudinal. And the other aspect, which is the mysterious aspect, if you don't have medical history, so you don't know what it's in the blind, and ours was a newborn. Yours was 11 months old, so you already had some medical history as to whether or not they were developing. Lucy was developing well or not. We had no idea, and the decision we had to make was no matter what any sonogram might show, because there had never been a sonogram at the time we made the decision to go through with this. The commitment had to be, it was sight unseen. No matter, and that's a huge leap of faith for two people that were not faith-based.
Yeah, absolutely.
For if it were to happen today, my trust would be in the Lord, and it would be completely different. But this was completely in the blind. And like I said, I was just shy of my 38th birthday, so I was middle-aged, much older than the average adoptive parent. So it's so important that the two of you were in the same place at the same time, because part of the difficulties in adoption is when you're not in unity. I mean, it's a problem in any marriage, period. But this concept, for this reason, a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they become one, is magnified. It comes under the microscope when adoption comes into play, because this is having to navigate all of these channels. And to be honest with you, it's almost like it's a class of people called to adopt that are set apart, and it's almost punitive. It doesn't cost $40,000 to impregnate somebody and have a natural birth. There's no FBI background checks. There's no fingerprinting. There's no getting a letter from the local sheriff's office. There's no classes you have to take that are required. There's no intermediaries. There's no legal fees. It's almost set up to punish you financially because you're doing something to keep a child out of the system. When you're secular, you're looking at these huge checks you're writing, and even if you can't afford them, you're thinking, well, the people next door are having a child, and like they got $100 deductible.
Yeah.
That's it. We have a $40,000 deductible, and so there's a financial aspect to this as well that tugs on you. And ministry is not the highest paying profession in the world, so it's important to understand that there are natural aspects of consideration in this answering this call. It's more than just saying, yes, Lord, we're going to do this. You got to now you have to put, this is that faith without works equation. And now the work goes into play.
Yeah.
We're talking with Jennifer Phillips, author of the new devotional for adoptive parents entitled Hope When It's Hard. It's a handbook for those of us who have adopted and are navigating the various knowns, and there are many knowns in this process that we can anticipate, and then there's the unknowns that are unique to every adoption and every child. But the wisdom is sound, and the comfort is sound, and the encouragement that it is worth it and you are not alone, because this is one of the loneliest processes. My immediate family couldn't comprehend. Your immediate family might not have even been able, you can share the stories, but it's beyond their comprehension because they haven't experienced it. And this book gives great comfort in that. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into some of the areas that Jennifer highlights in the book that will bring you who are considering, you who have already you're in the process, or you have an adopted child and you're wondering, what season am I in? And what do I do in this season? We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Sean Tabbitt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com, or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with fellow adoptive parent and sister, Jennifer Phillips, about her new book, Hope When It's Hard, a 30-day devotional for adoptive parents. Jennifer, welcome back.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
Jennifer, as we dig into this devotional, as you began to, you wrote the story about Lucy. This is kind of the follow-on. Now you have years in between, and you're navigating life as an adoptive parent, and you're realizing that the adoptive process is just the beginning of a long set of processes and experiences and encounters that you're going to have that are unique to adoptive children and adoptive parenting. And in your case, your Lucy doesn't look like your other children. In your case, you brought her to America. Then you went back to Australia, and then you came back to the States, and so you've got this back and forth. There's transition, all of this, and so now in the throes of all this, you're realizing that there's a lot of things that you're going through, that you're journaling and you're documenting, and wow, if I'm going through this, I wonder, are many other adoptive parents going through the same thing? And as you began to talk to people, what did you find?
You know, I think a lot of times when it comes to adoption, that, you know, as adoptive parents, we can think that we need to present this picture that everything is great. You know, because it's like, well, this is what we chose. And, you know, if we were to say anything about this is hard or difficult, you know, this would prevent somebody from wanting to adopt themselves, or this might even harm God's reputation in a sense, you know, that he's for adoption. And so I've got to be, you know, for this and present this picture. And so, you know, what I often found is that adoptive parents are sometimes scared to talk about the difficult aspects. You know, there's so much beauty to it, but there's brokenness and loss and hardship as well. And so I really wanted to give parents a space to say, oh, you too? Oh, me too. Yeah, I didn't know. And permission to share the things that are difficult. And so the more that I talked about these things, I felt like others were freed up to share as well. Maybe when it's before, they felt like, you know, I didn't feel like I could talk about this. Even maybe their families hadn't been supportive of it. And so then especially they feel like they can't say, you know, the things that are difficult. And so the more I talked, you know, the more I saw, people need a space. They need to hear a voice that validates how they're feeling and doesn't condemn them for it, but comes alongside and says, this is completely normal, what you're experiencing, and there's hope through the heart of it, like the title of the book says.
You know, it's interesting. There's, you have this calling. You feel that it's a clarion call. Your husband's called as well. And you have doubts. Doubts in the face of faith. Is that something to apologize for? I seem to remember a father coming to the feet of Jesus and saying, my daughter. And Jesus says, your daughter's fine. And he said, I believe, but forgive my unbelief.
Like, that's the theme of my life. I believe, God, would you please help my unbelief because I'm scared. and I'm not sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, in this process that it can be tempting to feel guilty about that. Does that mean I don't love her? Does that mean that I think this was a mistake? Well, no, it's just natural and human to be afraid, but that gives instead of feeling shame about that, it really is an opportunity to run to the Father and say that beautiful statement, Lord, I believe, will you help my unbelief? And kind of running to him for rescue in that. And he loves to meet us in that place.
The words that almost every adoptive parent can expect to hear at some point in the teenage years especially is, you're really not my dad. You're really not my mother. Pierces the heart with a dagger that is devastating. And all along, no matter what you do, no matter how good a parent, the minute you begin to parent, that's when, and we look at the rebellious nature of anyone, and so you try to prepare yourself for it. You know the day will come when you might hear those very words. But where do you turn? And I'm so thankful that this exists. My daughter's 31 now, and we've navigated all of that, and now we have the incredible relationship that we have. We talk every day. We FaceTime with my granddaughter several times a week, and the stories all really do have a happy ending because a child's life was saved. And when you think about a birth mother, the gift of life that they've given us, that regardless of their circumstances, whether or not they were a crack mom or they were a convict, whatever their circumstances were, the choice they made to carry the child through pregnancy and deliver is, as you say, the birth mothers are heroes. And we need to remember that and to honor that and to encourage others.
That's been really important for me to share with my daughter because, there isn't much chance at all that we'll ever be able to find her birth mother. And so we may never know, the situation, the circumstances surrounding. And something that I always go back with her, to her with is that, you know what, she did an incredible thing in choosing, to place you at a place where you would be cared for and be able to be with a family, something that for some reason that we don't know, she wasn't able to give you. And so that's a way for us to honor her. Even if we never knew anything else about the situation, we knew that she chose life and made sure she was cared for. And, we can forever be thankful for that.
In the book, you have a chapter called Adoption is Not Normal, or Not Natural. Expand on that for us.
Yeah. So, in most instances, and obviously there's some situations where this isn't the case for different reasons, but in most cases, when a mother has a child biologically, there's a bond that happens there, because the child has been in utero for 9 months. There's bonding that happens through that. But when we met our daughter at Christmas 2014, this 15-month-old was placed in our arms that was a stranger, and so we're strangers to her. She's a stranger to us. And there's nothing about that that's natural that says, okay, and now you're a family. And so it can feel really awkward. Like I remember, I didn't know how she liked to have a bottle. I didn't know what helped her go to sleep. I didn't know how she wanted to be held. I didn't even speak the language that she was used to hearing. So this process of bonding, trying to create a situation where she could trust, it felt clumsy at times. And particularly with her, I mean, she honestly didn't want anything to do with us. And she would physically lean as far back as she could away from us, like hands in the air when we held her, and just didn't want us at all. And so that, I think in the book, I'd say, it's a peculiar thing to love a child that doesn't love you back. It's a strange, unnatural thing for a parent and a child. And so kind of navigating through that, through choosing patient pursuit of a heart that isn't naturally drawn to yours. And sometimes in the case, yours isn't naturally drawn to them right away. It's a process of building safety and building trust and choosing to love. And that can feel really awkward.
One of the underlying challenges is the issue of rejection. Why did my mother not keep me? Why did my mother give me away? Are you going to give me away too? And understanding all that, and you have in the day 21, Mama always comes back, which is such an important message to an adopted child. Nothing teaches you how to connect at that level of dealing with what did I do to cause my mother to give me up.
Yeah.
It's a thought that many, I don't know if all, but it would seem natural that all would have that thought at some point in time, the realization that you're not their biological parent. We can say that you didn't grow under my heart, you grew in it, but those are words that don't have a lot of meaning when a child's feeling rejection. So in that rejection process, you then begin to feel rejected because they are rejecting the love that you have so generously poured out. How do you help us navigate through that?
Yeah. I think really, we'll never be able to understand completely, the depth of the pain that adoptive kids experience, and just that issue of abandonment, rejection, those themes that can just so deep and come out in different ways throughout their lives. And so I think really an important thing for us to do as adoptive parents is try to, as much as it hurts us, and rightly so, to try to separate ourselves out a little bit to just be able to see them, and to be able to try the best we can to walk alongside and be empathetic and supportive, and to understand, of course, they're going to struggle with that. And of course, in their pain, they would push us away. And, I just think about like the story of the prodigal son, and the father, he's so patient and he's steady, and he never stops looking and pursuing. And I just think for us, like, that it's okay. It's normal. And in our pain, I think the problem can come in when in our pain, we're unable to see them anymore. All we can see is our pain. And so to be able to still to see them, to show empathy and support them, because that's a painful journey that they've got to walk, and it's tough.
I can tell you that the biggest turning point in my daughter's life was when she gave birth. And she held her daughter in her arms for the first time. And she's heard the story of me after this long, lengthy court battle to terminate the father's rights because the birth mother had lied about who the birth father was, and we just couldn't get, and we finally had to get to have a trial and a court ruling that was where the judge was willing to terminate the rights after a 6-month court battle. That for 9 months I held this child in my arms, and when the phone rang, it could have been, she's changed her mind. And the day that I brought her home from the courthouse, I sat down on the couch holding her in my arms, and the tears that I wept over her literally drenched this 9-month-old child. I mean, she was soaked. And she said to me, she said, "Daddy, you've told me that story so many times, and I didn't really understand it until I held my daughter for the first time." And she said, "Now I can go back 31 years and sit on that couch with you and look up at your face as you rejoice that I was finally yours."
That's beautiful.
The words spoken by the judge were the most moving words. He said that this child is now to be as if she was your natural born child, and entitled to every God-given right afforded to a natural born child. As a Jewish man, that meant my daughter was Jewish. For me, that was so powerful that she would join the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and be available for citizenship and recognized in Israel, and have her Jewish roots and heritage as I did. And then when we came to faith in the Messianic Synagogue, I came, and then 3 years later she came to faith in a youth group, that she would still have that Jewish identity and still have that, so that it is a part of that bonding process. Such words of comfort in here for, and I as an adoptive father reading this devotional, I could relate to almost every one of these, not issues, but navigational waypoints, if you will, on the journey. And it does come to a point when the child is reconciled and decides their identity is secure and they're going to go on with their life, and being an adopted child is something now they're proud of. Or my daughter's response is, when they say we look alike, is, "Well, of course we do. This is my dad. Why wouldn't we look alike?" But
That's right.
It is exactly what you intended it to be, and that is hope when it's hard. And I want to tell you that you accomplished it, and not as just somebody who read a book about, but somebody who has lived through this experience. I wholeheartedly endorse this book for every parent out there, whether or not you're considering adoption, you're in the adoption process, you have an adopted child, you're in the teen years of trying to navigate and wondering, what have I gotten myself into? This is an incredible, in your bedside drawer, to pull out and to study and remind yourself that God's got this, and that He called you to this, and that where the grace of God leads you, where the will of God leads you, the grace of God will keep you. Jennifer Phillips, thank you for sharing these words of encouragement to all of us who are in this group of this fraternity, if you will, of adopted parents. That great wisdom, outstanding scripture to support it, and I thank you for taking the time to invest back into the community that shares a common bond with every other adopted parent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and this has been such an encouraging conversation.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you, my friend. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.